Senator Cortez Masto from Nevada is recognized from her office.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the panelists here today. Let me just state the obvious, because I think some of my Republican colleagues obviously are out there stating the obvious, which is families and individuals are dealing with higher prices. What I didn't hear from some of my colleagues was, how do we address it? How do we find solutions working together to address it in the short term, long term? And I know one way to address it is to show up. I don't understand why my colleagues didn't show up to the hearing the other day to reappoint Jerome Powell to the Federal Reserve, Bill Brainerd to the Federal Reserve, and look at 3 new positions. I have not heard that they have concerns about those individuals, so it disappointing to me that they didn't show up. Why is this important? Because the Federal Reserve has the important monetary tools to help us address inflation, which we see corresponding to the high prices that our families are dealing with right now. I see it in my state. I talk to my families. I talk to individuals. I see it at the gas pump when I fill up my tank. I see it in my own family when my mother goes grocery shopping and she's telling me the prices. And I see it when I'm shopping, when my husband's shopping. So the obvious is there. But what are we going to do about it? And so this is the conversation I appreciate for the panelists being here today, because unfortunately, some of my colleagues are more about stating the obvious, not finding solutions. But here's an area that I want to focus on because of the high prices that I see in my state, including housing. And this is an area that I've been talking to many within my state about how do we increase that supply chain to address the high housing prices. And Dr. Bernstein, you talked a little earlier about this with Senator Warner, who highlighted the fact that we do have whether it's 5 million or 7 million, we have a housing shortage here. And what can we do about working together within the administration? I appreciate your comments that we need to continue and you're coordinating and the administration's coordinating with Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and federal home loan banks that we're looking at continuing low-income housing tax credit, and it's important to continue that in the BBB. Let me ask you this. In the Build Back Better bill, there were some housing components that are actually going to address the housing supply chain, and there's a number of them, not just increasing the low-income tax housing credit authority, but there's reduction of bond financing threshold from 50% to 25%. To address it, there's 50% basis boost for properties serving extremely low-income households that we are looking at. We are looking at closing the qualified contract loophole to prevent the premature loss of units to early termination from the program. We're looking at protecting nonprofit sponsors' ability to purchase properties at year 15. We're looking to coordinate housing credit, renewable energy tax credits. Or even looking at our tribal communities that we know need affordable housing and looking at area 30% basis boost. These were all proposals that we were looking at in the Build Back Better. And I can tell you, I am talking to members in my community about these proposals. This makes sense to increase the housing supply. My disappointment is my Republican colleagues aren't even there working with us. I'm hopeful that they hear this and are willing to help us address this issue instead of just pointing fingers. But can I ask you, based on the proposals that you've heard and some others, does that make sense? Are we working in the right areas, part of what we were looking at in the Build Back Better to address that housing supply and address this issue in short term and long term?
Not only does it make sense, but I don't see how we achieve the housing goals that you articulated and that historically partisans on all sides of the aisle have shared. As you've suggested, much of the policies that you're talking about typically involve increasing access to housing finance more often than not targeted at the bottom half of the housing market, which is where the supply constraints have been most acute. And historically, these have been bipartisan supported measures. These, in many cases, are subsidies that go to builders whose housing deals simply don't pencil out in the absence of the kinds of measures you're talking about. Now, we've tried, as you know, in our administration to leverage funds for the Capital Magnet Fund to work with the FHFA to increase LIHTC equity investment caps significantly in order to, again, increase affordable financing for that sector of the market. And as you mentioned, in Build Back Better, there are extensive tax credits for the supply side, grants to rebuild and renovate, and community block grants to renovate infrastructure related to housing, as well as to push back on exclusionary zoning. Finally, what's particularly important about the comments that you've made is that every intervention that you've just elevated is on the supply side of the housing market. There is a demand side, and we can think about that and worry about that too. But the emergency is really on the supply side, and the financing policies that we've discussed answer the mail precisely there.
Thank you. And I know I've run out of time, and I will submit the rest of my questions for the record because I do have concerns about what the administration is doing to restore international travel and our trade flows and prevent future instability in the hospitality sector. But let me say this. This is a time for people showing up, working together to find solutions, not to state the obvious to families, individuals that they already know. It's time to show up. It's time to have solutions, come to the table and work together. Clearly, there are solutions that are out there, but we need our colleagues, all of them, to show up at the end of the day. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Cortez Masto. Senator Warren.